Live from New York, it's Saturday night.
Hello and welcome to the Not Ready for Primetime podcast. We're Gary Seath and Brad Robinson.
And you're not.
This week, we're talking about Season 1, Episode 17, with host Ron Nessen and musical guest Patti Smith Group. Brad, there is so much to talk about in this show. I know that we can't do it, just the two of us.
So much. We had to pull in a special guest for this one.
Yes, we want to welcome Ian Fermaglich to the episode. Ian, welcome.
Thank you, guys. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you. We are both fans of your podcast, Ian Talks Comedy.
Yeah, great show. Not only SNL, all facets of comedy, but tons of SNL writers and performers. And again, if you're like us and you're a fan of the older eras of SNL and just comedy in general, TV comedy, all kinds of comedy, it's an amazing, great interview podcast to listen to.
Thank you. And I've had a friend of your pod, Neil Levy, on. He's a friend of the pod as well.
Yes.
Friend of the pod, see?
He is friend of the pod. Yeah, you've had a bunch of the original writers from the show, right?
Yes. Tom Schiller, Marilyn Suzanne Miller, Rosie Schuster, and Alan Zweibel.
Those are great. These are great gets you have.
And yeah, and Walter Williams, Mr. Bill, and Harry Shearer. And then the 80s people and the 90s people.
Yeah, it's great. It's amazing, though, like Brad said, the gamut of folks that you are able to talk to, and that they're so nice and welcoming and give you their time to do this. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I don't know when this is going to come out, but my next episode that's coming out is Kevin Haney, who was the makeup man.
Nice.
In the 70s and 80s.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you get some really great, like, behind-the-scenes people you never would have thought of. It's so interesting.
Thank you.
Well, this episode, Ian, were you familiar with this episode with Ron Nessen, press secretary for President Gerald Ford at the time?
Oh, yeah. It's a very famous episode in SNL history. First time they used a politician. And it gives SNL credibility. And I think Nessen was trying to use SNL's credibility to help Gerald Ford.
And vice versa. I think SNL saw an opportunity where we can get some free publicity on the national scale as getting, the national press secretary on the show. And it was interesting to see them, the sketches they did with him and how they kind of treated Ford a little bit, maybe softer than normal. But then you get these sketches that he's not in where they're just completely bonkers sketches, some of the that he's going to be indirectly associated with just by being on the same episode.
Right. Michael O'Donoghue known to say, let's take the president and stick his press secretary up his ass.
And even getting him on the episode's amazing. It's an Al Franken trick, right? His brother was covering the presidential campaign, and he was up with him in New Hampshire and met into Nessen. And Nessen happened to be a fan of the show, happened to tune in. It was the Buck episode, right, where he was doing Ron Nessen with Gerald Ford and really got into it and started watching the show religiously after that, right?
Exactly, yes. Exactly what happened. And then Chevy did the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
Right, in March, right, about a month or so before this.
Right.
Which in and of itself is amazing, right? That he did that dinner, 7 months after the show premiered?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Like that's a huge deal. So getting Ron Nessen on this show was quite an accomplishment.
Absolutely. And Gerald Ford to tape those 3 bits.
Yeah, sitting president. I mean, that doesn't happen again until what, like 6 months ago when Biden came on? They haven't had a sitting president since then.
Right. Yeah, you know the story of Gary Weiss and Lauren and Chevy went into the White House and they were setting him up, and he had 3 lines. And Lauren goes, if this turns out well, who knows what's next?
Yeah.
He's the president.
There's a story as well at the end of it. They go and they didn't take the microphone off his lapel or whatever at the end of the bit. So they're done and Ford gets up to leave and he's connected. And of course it's old school. So the mic's actually connected to the actual camera. And as he's walking out and it finally gets tight enough, he stumbles and almost falls. The camera almost falls over. And Ron Nessen had to beg Lorne Michaels to never tell this story ever to anybody. But no, it's an amazing episode. I'm psyched to get into it. And it's a good episode. It is surprisingly a very good episode. I think part of it is we're so used in recent times to seeing non-performers, athletes and or politicians that just aren't funny and they're so stiff and nothing works. They can't figure out how to write them in, that I came in with such low expectations to this. And I thought, they did a great job writing for him and incorporating him into the show as to who he was. And I thought he was great. I thought he had a lot of fun with it and he was open to stuff. And I enjoyed this episode so much more than I thought I was going to.
I thought he was wonderful, right? For being a press secretary.
He came in and showed Dick Cavett how to get it done. That's all I'm going to say.
Don't take shots at Dick Cavett. We specifically
He's
said
around.
we weren't going to blame Dick Cavett.
Can email us later and give his side of the story. I'm not saying he can't. info@notreadyforptpod.com.
Well, should we just get into this show? Because there's so much to talk about.
There's so much. Let's get into it.
All right. The cold open starts, once again, the Dead String Quartet. We saw this on episode, I can never remember the numbers.
It's when they came back from break.
Right.
The Elliot Gould episode.
Okay. So we saw the same cold open, right? The quartet sitting on stage, except John has replaced Dan in this configuration. And they're all dead. And then eventually John leans into Lorraine, who knocks into Garrett, who then knocks into Chevy, and he falls off the stage. Except this time, instead of Chevy saying live from New York, we get the recorded message from President Ford saying live from New York.
Yeah, it's the same sketch, same exact sketch as we saw before. Swapping John for Dan, it's the same exact bit. Did you notice the huge crowd ovation while they're all just sitting there in silence?
Yes.
Really something to take note of. They just have 4 people sitting on stage in silence and the crowd just erupts into applause before they actually really do any of the actual sketch, which I thought was kind of cool to see at this point.
Yeah, and they were also in a technical strike. The cameramen and the NABET, they were on strike, and that's why there's a lot of those single camera, one person operating the camera sketches tonight.
Or stationary cameras. Like there wasn't a lot of movement. They weren't panning back and forth. So people would just be stationary and the cameras would lock in on them the whole time. Yeah.
So maybe that's why they used that bit.
That's true.
Yeah. I didn't know if that was one of the bargaining chips where they were like, we're going to do this really safe, open, Mr. President. So you're not, just setting him up to something like this is what we did. This is what we're going to do. But this time you throw the live. I don't know. It's
also similar to the Buck episode where they kind of, I think, knew they were going to use the Gerald Ford bit this week in a bigger N Oval Office sketch, the same way they did with the Buck Henry episode when he played Nessen.
Right. Well, I enjoyed this cold open. I mean, it was the same. It was fine. But then having the president throw live to New York, I thought was fun and different.
Very cool.
Yeah. Totally agree.
The standard opening credits. I can finally not pay too much attention to those.
Well, the only thing I'd say
have, you're going to say Bill Crystal?
Well, Bill Crystal and Don Pardo does not say NBC Saturday Night. Last week, he either misread or misquoted, but so everybody's on the same page now this week.
Seemingly. And then we have our monologue from Ron Nessen, who comes on stage. And Brad, to your point about the ovation that the Dead Quartet got, I thought Ron Nessen got a very large ovation as well.
It's like everybody's on their best behavior. It's kind of very much like Desi Arnaz. They wanted him in there. They embraced him. They wanted him to feel part of it and have fun with it. So I'm sure they relayed that to the crowd and try to ease the nerves a little bit. But yeah, and his monologue's good. It comes out how he learned a few new phrases and he started his job. And friend of the pod, Neil Livy, shows up, gets some lines. Good for him with the president calling in. It all works. It's all really funny.
Yeah.
I think what helped Ron Nessen is that before he was a press secretary, he was a reporter for ABC.
That's a good point.
So he's been on TV and live TV, and maybe that's a reason why he does such a good job.
Yeah, he knows the camera and he knows how to work that.
He knows to give Chevy a shout out. But it was decent. I mean, the guy's not an entertainer. He is a public speaker and he's used to speaking in front of people, yes. But I thought he did a great job for what this was.
Totally agree.
And I know you guys did this on the Desi Arnaz episode. I was going to ask you, how old do you think Ron Nessen is during this monologue?
I just looking at him, I think he's early 50s.
Being how wrong I was about late 40s? Late 40s, early 50s, late 40s.
41. He's about to turn 42.
Man.
That makes me feel so good about how well I look right now.
Oh, you shouldn't. You shouldn't. Yeah, it's
Gary,
right.
I'm trying to be in a nice mode. This is new me. Come on. Positivity here.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'll be positive, not honest. Well, the first bit after the monologue is a classic commercial.
Hard not to be positive about this.
Right? This is the Bassomatic. Classic. Dan, Pitchman, Bassomatic. I don't have to set this up.
How many times has this happened to you? You have a bass. You're trying to find an exciting new way to prepare it for dinner. You could scale the bass, remove the bass's tail, head, and bones, and serve the fish as you would any other fish dinner. But why bother now that you can use Robco's amazing new kitchen tool, the Super Bassomatic 76? Yes, fish eaters, the days of troublesome scaling, cutting, and gutting are over. Because Super Bassomatic 76 is the tool that lets you use the whole bass with no fish waste without scaling, cutting, or gutting. Here's how it works. Catch a bass, remove the hook, and drop the bass. That's the whole bass into the Super Bassomatic 76. Now adjust the control dial so that bass is blended just the way you like it. Yes, it's just that simple.
I mean, I have no notes. It's, yeah, written and performed by Dan Aykroyd. Classic. It holds up till today. It's everything great about Dan Aykroyd. The writing, the performance, the delivery, the energy, the cutaway to Lorraine is fantastic. That's terrific bass. I mean, there's a reason why this is legendary. This is perfection right here.
Totally agree. I have no notes on this at all.
Right. This is one of those that you see, like our age, our guys our age see it on like best of clips when we're growing up or whatever. And we're just like, I just remember being like, this is insane. I love this.
You know, it's funny. I've been going down kind of a rabbit hole of old anniversary episodes the last couple of weeks. I watched the 15th. I watched the 25th recently. And, you know, year after year, the early era's amount of clips get shortened because, you know, there's just more to show, obviously. And in about, 2 years from now, they're going to have a 50th anniversary and they're going to have a clip segment. And you know this clip 100% will be there. Like, it's never going away.
Yeah. And Dan, to your point, Brad, is just so good as the pitch man.
He's got a great episode. This is a great Dan episode, which is another reason why I really enjoyed this. He starts off hot and he keeps it going.
Yeah. Well, Chiron comes up for an Oval Office and we see President Gerald Ford, played by Chevy, playing golf with a tennis racket. And then we have Ron Nessen playing himself, asking President Ford if he could host NBC's Saturday Night. And then, Brad, I was thinking of you watching this because this, I feel like, goes into the jokes about Gerald Ford that you do not like.
I didn't think it was that bad.
Where he's calling for Ron Nessen when he's right next to him. Kind
Ron?
of buffoonery. No, not as bad as the last time?
I didn't. Yeah, I don't know why. It didn't bother me as bad as it did before. Who knows? That was old me. New me loved this. And I thought it was funny. I don't understand why they label it an Oval Office. Like, they're still not like leaning into it actually being Gerald Ford in the actual White House. I got the joke early on in the season. It seems odd to me they keep doing it. We see probably the most seen Liberty line where roll over Liberty and let's go with the leash and the dog rolls over the stuffed dog. It's still funny. And Chevy does some great physical humor on this, getting up, stuff on the desk, walking through the flag again, saluting the flag. He's good.
The funniest thing about Gerald Ford and the criticizing him for being a buffoon and a bumpkin is he really was the best athlete to ever be the president. He was a college football star.
Right.
University of Michigan. I have to say it for my wife. I don't want to, but I should.
And the first George Bush was a pitcher at Yale. But
oh, right.
This is kind of like typical Gerald Ford jokes that we see on the show.
Yeah, nothing new here. It's a decent sketch. It went a little long, but I mean, I understand because they're trying to milk all they can out of Ron Nessen and his role and him being there. So why it felt long, it didn't bother me because I understood why they were doing it. And the fact that he was game for it was great. Like they make some decent jokes and jabs at Gerald Ford and Nessen's totally in on it. He had a lot of fun with it and I enjoyed watching it. And that kind of got me through the length of this.
And I was just really impressed again with Ron Nessen and then to your point, like the jokes they were making about Ford and he was in on them. He was fine.
I mean, he's playing a role that's not a stretch. He's playing himself. Like, it's a smart move. Like, go for it. Yeah. Lean into it. Works.
Yeah, he does a good job in that role, and he doesn't step on a line.
Right.
It's a shame they didn't put him in the next sketch.
he could have done well in the next sketch, I think. Just seeing what the next sketch is. It starts out for Flucker's Jam, and then the whole premise is that Dan and John and Chevy all come on and try to one up with a grosser name for a jam. So there's Nose Hair Jam, Death Camp Jam, Dog Vomit and Monkey Pus Jam, Painful Rectal Itch.
The idea that no matter how horrible the name or the worst sounding name, the better the actual product would be.
Yeah.
Mangled Baby Ducks.
That's, I think, where they really hit on it. It's where they really lean into the whole idea of this.
Yeah. Was that Dan, I think, said that?
Yeah, it just has a Dan cadence.
Right?
Mangled Baby Ducks. And 10,000 Nuns and Orphans.
That doesn't sound bad.
All eaten by rats.
And then Garrett comes on with the winner that it's so gross and disgusting they can't even say it on TV, is what Jane says. I didn't say, Jane started out as the original pitch person for this. And she just...
How great is Jane?
How great is Jane?
Like in this sketch, she's amazing. She comes out as the original spokesperson for Fluckers, and she's really good. And if you just sit there and watch her expression after Chevy comes in and Dan comes in, and when John comes in with the monkey pus, like that's really her, like her facial reactions through this entire thing is hilarious. She's so good and with no lines. She's great.
I'm waiting for the merch. I'm waiting for the How Great Is Jane t-shirt.
Yes. We'll work on that. And we will send you one, Ian. I think we need to do that soon.
Jane is great.
But to Ian's point earlier, this is a classic example. This is Michael O'Donoghue really trying to stick it, to having Ron Nessen on. How far can we go? How ridiculous can we get? How over the top can we be in a sketch that is on the same episode as Nessen? I mean, even Chevy is another instance of Chevy maybe not totally game for what's being said or what he has to do, because he doesn't look like he's loving this sketch as much as, say, Dan or maybe John is.
Yeah.
And watching it at Camp David is the President of the United States, his wife, and his children. So they are watching.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious what they thought of the next act. The Patti Smith Group comes on, introduced by Ron Nessen, who says it's a treat for him to have them there with him.
Is it, Ron? Is it, though?
Maybe.
He didn't do the best job selling it. Maybe.
He's only 41. So he can be into the Patti Smith Group.
Yeah, he should be.
Looks more of an Anne Murray type of guy.
I don't know. Anne Murray. He could be an Esther Phillips kind of guy. You know who he probably liked back then?
Betty Carter?
Neil Sedaka.
Oh, Neil Sedaka once said, he was on American Idol when it was at its most popular, and his quote was, he said, "That was ear delicious." That's exactly how he said it. So when I hear Neil Sedaka, I think of ear delicious.
Still not winning points in my book. Sorry, Neil. But let's get, please, Patti Smith Group. Let's see what this is about right now.
Yeah. Patti Smith Group comes on and sings Gloria in Excelsis Deo. This is originally a Van Morrison song that she and her band covered for their recently released album, Horses. I love this song. I love this version of this song. I love everything about Patti Smith Group.
Keep going then.
Why do you seem surprised?
No, I am not a Patti Smith fan, but I love this performance. I mean, I thought this was really great. This is the best musical guest this show's had up to this point. And again, I may not like her that much, but I thought this was great. We finally get a rock and roll act on the show, or at least, punk act, something in that vein. And pretty damn good performance.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I'm in the middle on Patti Smith. I like 70s punk music. She's not one of my favorites. The poem at the beginning is hers, where Jesus died for somebody's sins and not mine, which it was 12:01 when she said that, so it was Easter Sunday.
Well, she does give the shout out right at the end too. Happy Easter, CBGBs.
Yeah.
She does a great version of the song. And I always thought that her guitarist looked like David Koresh.
I'm going to have to do a side-by-side of them now, Ian. I'm very curious.
His name is Lenny Kaye.
All right. I was surprised how early in the night this was because it's Patti Smith. Like I don't know. In my mind, I guess
They've been bouncing around so much lately.
Yeah.
They've been, right off the bat, late in the bat. Wasn't it Desi Arnaz didn't do his till after Weekend Update? So I feel like they keep bouncing stuff around lately. I think because of the act that it was, coupled with the host, they wanted it in earlier than later.
Okay, that
and
makes
it made
sense.
total sense. Like we remember how often we talk about vibe of the show and pacing and where stuff falls. Like this was great where it was. The placement in the show early was awesome. She did a great job. I mean, her and like this is the kind of act I said. This is the kind of act you want. Her and Jimmy Cliff probably our two best acts we've had so far this season.
Yeah, I used to make a tape back when it had cassettes, and I had Jimmy Cliff's performance on it, and I had her performance on it.
Nice. Those are my two favorites so far this season, Ian. So,
and I thought Desi Arnaz was really good too.
Yes.
Yeah, he was.
Yes. Also good was Ron Nessen again in our next sketch, the first Press Secretaries Through History sketch.
This is a great gag for this host.
This is an amazing gag for this host, right? I mean, this is why else would you do this gag unless you had the press secretary on the show? But he comes out as Leonid something, the press secretary for Catherine the Great. Catherine the Great, the Russian. She wasn't a czar. Anyway,
she's dead. Now known as Catherine the Mashed. And there's your joke.
Yes.
And here's our runner for the episode.
Let's see what he would be like if he was the press secretary for different people in history.
Which I'm down for. This starts out promising. It's short and sweet. It's really funny. I'm saying right now, Ron Nessen's 2 for 2.
I agree with that.
So like this, like knowing this as a runner or thinking this is a runner at this point, totally down with it.
He's doing what he was there for.
Do you want to start complaining about the Ness sketch?
Oh, I'm not going to complain about it.
No?
Why would I complain about it?
I don't know. I felt like it was very Pong-esque and that you wouldn't like it. Am I wrong?
It's much smarter than Pong, though.
Ooh.
So the next sketch is we're just looking at a lie detector graph, and we're getting Gilda as Julie Nixon and Dan as David Eisenhower. And Julie is giving David a lie detector test, asking questions about what he knew about her father and what he told, because he knows Woodward and Bernstein, what, if anything, he told them. And then it gets into things that I'm curious. Ian mentioned that the president was watching at Camp David. She starts asking questions about what he knew about the Nixons' sex life, which just kind of threw me off. But knowing that Gerald Ford's watching this with his family now, I wonder what they're thinking.
I don't know what they thought about Richard Nixon's sex life.
I liked this because it was, again, like they're staying in that political field with Ron Nessen there as the host. And I thought this was a smart way to, again, they've been poking at David Eisenhower all season in different ways. And this one's just like blatantly right out there.
It wasn't horrible. You could see where it was going, like right from the get-go. Once you realized who the voices were, you knew what the jokes were going to be, ballpark. You knew what's happening. It's a somewhat funny premise. I think it came up maybe a little bit short, but again, wasn't horrible. And overall, it was still enjoyable. Yeah.
And then they stay with government jokes more with an army bit starring John as an army recruiter for the new army.
Yes.
And he cleans up all the drug paraphernalia from his desk, talks about all the different ways that being in the army is good now and how it's different. And really the big selling point is that they can get the best stuff an army helicopter can carry from all over the world. And it's all just allusions to drugs. And the drugs, I think the tagline at the end is a joint venture that wants you to join. That's the bit.
Right. And apparently the army was so upset they took their ads for a while off of the show.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, that seems a little extreme.
I mean, this wasn't the worst sketch we've seen, but by no means the best. It was fun to see John do this as opposed to Chevy. This felt like this was something that up until this point had been like Chevy's wheelhouse.
Yeah.
The drug jokes, the drugs as dope and the rolling of the joints. So it felt something that Chevy would have done normally. Other than that, not much else there. I also think this in 1976 plays a lot funnier than it does now. So I was kind of giving a little bit of grace that. I'm sure at the time it was a funnier joke than it plays now.
And then we roll into Weekend Update. where we get our second cameo from the president.
Not bad. It's fun to see him take a shot at Chevy. I'm Gerald Ford and you're not. That is a callback, correct me if I'm wrong, Ian, to the correspondence dinner. Didn't Gerald Ford throw that line out that night when they did that together, him and Chevy Chase, when they did their bits back and forth?
Yes, he did. The correspondence dinner that they paralleled each other. I'd love to see the video of that, but I've only read about it.
Yeah, he's got another good line where he busts Chevy's balls, where he's like, Chevy Chase, you're a very, very funny suburb.
Right.
Which, silly, but I like it. I think it's funny. I mean, for the president, it's a good joke.
Yeah.
And he, Chevy Chase comes from, his family came off the Mayflower, and Chevy Chase, Maryland is named, it's the same name.
Yeah.
It's amazing. This weekend update was fast. There were a lot of jokes, a lot of political jokes.
Yeah.
They went after Ford and Carter and a couple of senators and Nixon and Ronald Reagan. There was a lot. But he just kind of pumped joke after joke.
We got this week's installment of jokes Chevy Chase does not like, with the Gerald Ford trying to help the country with the gas crisis, leaving Fort Andrews Air Force Base on foot.
Yep.
And no one laughed. Chevy gives his look off screen. Like, why did you make me say that?
And we get our live report from Lorraine in Madrid with Ron Nessen as the press secretary for Generalissimo Francisco Franco, whose name was Boyardee.
Whose was? Nessen's was?
Nessen's name was Boyardee.
I was too occupied when they cut away to Lorraine. Two things. One, that the background was completely crooked. And two, that Ron Nessen is wearing the same suit he's been wearing all night. It took me a little while to get past those two things. But it's a funny attempt getting to work Nessen in. And he's only the second host now to be on Update. So give the man some credit.
Yeah, him and Buck.
Yeah. No, I have nothing bad to say about Ron Nessen in this sketch.
He's even got a great line at the end where Lorraine makes a comment to him how he doesn't have an accent. And he says, no, but the Generalissimo doesn't either.
Right.
Pretty good. Because he's dead, Gary. It was a joke because he's dead. That's why he said
Oh, he's still dead?
See? See? Now it's funny.
Thank you for spelling that one out for me.
Here to help.
Our commercial this week totally took me by surprise. I was not expecting Jerry Rubin's wallpaper collection to be our weekend update commercial.
Yeah, that was surprising to see back again.
That was from episode 2?
Yeah, and I welcome it because it's been so long. I take it.
I guess he's one of them damn dirty hippies they wanted to showcase.
Nah.
And we get this week's installment of Emily Latilla.
Do you want me
where
to do
she
this?
is coming.
Because I'm sure you're unhappy.
No, I liked this one.
Oh,
but go ahead, you do it.
Really? Wait. Oh,
I just said I liked it.
Go. Okay, go ahead.
Emily Latilla's rebuttal this week is against the presidential erection. So she takes that to mean monuments. So we have all these monuments for dead presidents, but why do we need to be erecting things now? I thought this was fun. It was short.
It was short.
It was tight.
Yep.
And I just, that I think was the key for me. I was like, boom, boom, boom. Good.
Well, and Ian may be able to chime in on this. I felt they just totally missed the real joke with the erections and using monuments. And I don't know, maybe if the censors came into play on this, so they had to rewrite it or something. But it to me, when she said presidential erections, I was excited. I'm like, this is going to be funny. I can't wait to see what she does with this. And
you were excited that she said erections?
So let's go back and edit that part out. Hold on. But I thought it was going to be really funny. I thought it was going to be great. And they kind of like softballed it. I mean, it was, like you said, it was short, it was tight, it was funny. I just thought they could have done more. But I don't know, Ian, am I wrong? Am I just guessing?
It's almost like you knew and were just bringing me on to answer that question. You're exactly right.
Oh, really? Am I? Oh, wow.
Oh, you didn't?
Gary, write that down.
Ian, everyone is surprised when Brad's right. So
Okay. Alan Zweibel and Gilda wrote it about presidential penises, and the censor was like, come on, you can't do this. I wonder where it would have gone, though. I'd love to see it.
right?
When did they get hit? Was it after dress? Do you know?
It might be because they don't do Weekend Update until
Right. They
Saturday.
don't. Yeah.
So, yeah, the bit might have been written Saturday morning.
So they had like 2 hours to come up with something new, or
Yeah, or ditch Emily.
God forbid, ditch Emily Latilla.
Oh, no.
I thought so. That's like I said. I was surprised. I'm surprised you liked it so much, but
No, I just, again, because of how short and sweet it was, that's why.
Speaking of things you like, can we please talk about the film by Gary Weiss?
Sure. So
like
Gary Weiss's film this week, I didn't not like it. I thought it was fine. I didn't hate it.
Good non-answer. Ian, yes, no? Gary Weiss film?
I actually liked it.
Aha! This is going to be okay.
Because I like
What did...
I didn't
I
mind.
even like the song by Pete Seeger, which I had to look up who sang it.
Yeah, it's called Garbage, I believe, right, Ian? That's just the name of the song?
Bake and bake potato. Waves says potato.
I like the Gary Weiss films when he's out talking to real people.
Yeah.
The ones that I haven't liked were when he focused on one or two people that just weren't entertaining.
Yes. This was
And
more
this
than
one
one or two
started
people,
out,
which helped.
yeah, and it started out with these characters, these sanitation workers, and he's asking them, what should we call you? And the one guy's like, I don't care. Like,
Yeah.
It was endearing from the start, and then it's all about trash and how much garbage they pick up. And then he talks to the one guy who talks about all of the dead bodies that come up in the river
That start popping up in the spring.
Yeah, that's my favorite part of it.
Yeah, I enjoyed this more than I have the last few now that he got off his Animal trilogy. And I will say every Gary Weiss film does throw a really good line. And for me, this one was when he's interviewing the different drivers about the stuff they found. And the one guy, the driver, looks at him and says, well, that just depends on what's valuable to you. I'm a reader. I found a lot of books.
Yes.
I don't know why. I just thought that was the funniest line of the whole thing. But I've also come to realize, I guess we're now grading Gary Weiss on a curve. So in comparison to other Gary Weiss films, it wasn't that bad.
And compared to Albert Brooks films,
Yes, go on.
they're
No, he's asking you.
Oh, Ian, I'm trying to take a step back from picking on Mr. Brooks, especially now that he's no longer on the show. This is a new me I've started in the last couple of weeks. I'm trying to be less angry, especially towards people like Albert Brooks. But don't worry. Autumn Fizz.
oh god.
Yeah, Autumn Fizz. So
I like the Autumn Fizz sketch.
yeah, it's a shot of Gilda on a bed talking to camera. It's an ad. It's another ad for a new carbonated douche called Autumn Fizz. It brings out the natural fragrance of femininity with the effervescence of uncola. This was so silly and so absurd that and Gilda's sincerity in delivering it, I thought it was great.
She's great. And I'm wondering why Chevy comes out. And I'm pretty sure it's only for him to, one, hold the jars, and then two, for her to say, don't leave him holding the bag, which was a pretty good button at the end.
Yeah.
The people on the show were surprised they got away with that one.
Really?
Yeah. They're like, this is too silly, but oh well.
That's probably why they did get away. It's more silly than anything else. And I think that's why it works.
I mean, I guess getting douche past the censors at this time was surprising.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I believe it was on Ian's podcast where I heard Alan Zweibel talk about the Lord and Lady douchebag sketch and how they couldn't get that on for years.
Yeah.
Yeah, they wrote that in 76.
Yeah, that was a season 1 sketch, right?
Yeah.
Written for season 1. Yeah.
In between the May and then when they had to come back in July because NBC said, okay, we want 2 more episodes.
Right.
They wrote it and every year got it shot down.
Amazing. Well, earlier we talked about this being a very strong Dan episode, and the next sketch is really like, how great is Dan?
Classic Dan again.
So this is the Tomorrow Show with Dan playing Tom Snyder, hosting Ron Nessen as himself.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Sure. And Dan was so good in this. Like, he starts out as Tom Snyder with his arms flailing and everything and going all over the place. And when he stops talking, the audience just breaks out in applause.
Yes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Tomorrow Show. Our guest tonight is Mr. Ron Nessen. He's the press secretary to the President of the United States. Now, for those of you who might not know what's going on here, I'm just going to explain what this thing is all about, give you some background information. Mr. Nessen is the press secretary to President Ford. Now, the other fellow was the guy who got in trouble with the Watergate thing, and that whole thing blew up, and, well, we know what happened there. But President Ford is a guy who stands a very good chance of being elected by due electoral process this coming year, and Ron is, of course, the second Ron in a row to hold that office in the White House, and Ron number 2, but in fact number 1 now. How the heck are you, sir?
Fine, thank you very much, Tom.
That was amazing to me. Like in the middle of the sketch, everyone's just like, holy crap, this is amazing. And everyone starts clapping. This is great. I thought this was fun. I thought what bothered me was that Nessen's mic seemed to have been off, but that was a minor thing because Dan's Tom Snyder was so good.
Maybe that's part because I was thinking for as boring or as dry as I felt Nessen was, and I didn't mean that in a bad way, just who he is, what his persona, that Dan was just so mesmerizing. It carried you through the whole scene. And maybe I'd even take into account or notice the microphone thing you're mentioning.
I thought Dan was great. This is one of his most famous impressions, and he does it, for all 4 seasons he's there.
Yeah, he does it 11 times when he's on the cast.
When he comes back in 1995, he does a Tom Snyder sketch.
The episode he basically hijacked from John Goodman hosting.
Yeah, which was one of the few good ones from that season. And interesting thing, Harry Shearer did a Tom Snyder earlier on the Tomorrow Show. And he told me on my podcast that Dan Aykroyd said, yeah, I used your as a template to do mine.
Oh, really?
It's like, when one person cracks an impression.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, his laugh he does is amazing.
So good. Yeah.
And I thought the Mr. Peanut was a great topper at the end to bring that up. I thought that's pretty good.
Yeah. Jimmy Carter's campaign manager, Mr. Peanut. Yeah. And then that whole thing just intros home movies.
I know. And that was the only thing I didn't like about this is that you threw it to a home movie. Like, just go. You were set up to go to a commercial. Have him say, the classic, and now we go to one of our filmed messages. And it was so set up for that. And then come back and then have the cast set up home movies, like use Garrett or Lorraine or somebody we haven't seen yet.
Yeah. I just thought it was a bad way out when there were many other ways you could have done it. But otherwise, I thought it was a great, great piece.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
Well, the home movie this week is called Once in Our Lives. My first note watching the opening credits of this was, there are a lot of stars in this home movie.
I was waiting because of that for it to be set up like home movie, where it was just going to be like 1 20-second shot and that was going to be it. That's the first thing that I thought when I saw it.
That's what I thought too. But no, it was. And then it opens to a men's room with a bunch of urinals, and one man goes in and starts singing a song. And then more and more men join, and then they start singing in a round the whole time. And that was the movie. It was fun. I thought they did a nice job. Ian, what were your thoughts on this one?
It's a weird one. I try to find the music, but
I found it. It's like an old chant called I believe "Once in Our Lives, Let Us Drink to Our Wives." Am I wrong?
No, you're right. Yeah.
Okay,
but it's from like the 16 or 1700s.
Yeah.
So Catherine the Great was listening to this.
Yes, she was.
But this is a good one.
Yeah,
I like the guy who came in with the mop to clean.
The janitor comes in and he just turns back around to go. I thought that was great.
The guy out of the stall was, I don't know, but the janitor part was hilarious.
Yeah.
And you know what they get for their home movies? Nothing.
Yes.
Can we talk about the elephant in the room here real quick?
Sure.
The fact that none of those dudes washed their hands when they left the bathroom. Are we just not gonna? No? Okay. Just saying.
It's pre-COVID by many years.
Said it before and I'll say it again. 1976.
Right?
And as long as nobody worked there, don't think any laws were broken.
We finally get more of our runner, which we haven't seen for quite a while, considering we had one. We have our second press secretaries through history, and this was Oedipus's press secretary, who goes on to tell us that the king is marrying his mother, and the good queen mother was now the new queen wife. Again, this is funny. This is like, Nessen is great in this.
It sounded like a very Chevy line, no? Like a Weekend Update line.
Yeah.
The queen mother will now be known as queen wife. It just reeked of Weekend Update.
Yeah.
I'm getting a kick out of seeing Nessen not in his suit.
Yes, he's in a toga with
I enjoy that.
Yeah.
And I think that you have to be smart to get some of these jokes. Like, you got to know Oedipus.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, again, Nessen in a toga delivering this line was great. He did a nice job.
Toga.
Toga.
It's even funnier you describing it. Nessen in a toga. The pitch meeting, they're like, sold, moving on, next.
Yeah, exactly. Next, Ian, do you want to talk about this next sketch? Because I believe you have more information on it than either of us do.
Yes, thank you. I researched this. This is basically a Supreme Court decision that came out during the week of writing. And it was John Doe versus the Commonwealth of Virginia, in which a policeman followed home a homosexual man, waited, I guess, a half an hour before coming into his house and found him giving oral sex to his partner and arrested him under the sodomy law and went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said that states are allowed to have sodomy laws, ban sodomy. And what eventually happened is they said that 60% of heterosexuals practice sodomy, and there are more heterosexuals than homosexuals. And if you followed this law down the line, you'd be arresting much more people than if this was just a homosexual thing that you were trying to make illegal.
Oh.
So it came out the week of the show?
The decision,
Like this ruling?
The ruling came out the week of the show. Yes.
Wow. So they were on it.
Yeah.
This one almost didn't make it past the censors too, right? You know, I had read a story where in script form they read it and they were just really worried it was going to be too lewd and too obscene to show Jane and Chevy in bed. And
the censors had to be walked through the sketch.
Yeah.
And made sure that they were wearing clothes at all times under the covers, that there was no actual sex going on. I don't know why you would think that would happen, especially Chevy and Jane. I love the part when they said that you got to take the heels off, and then Jane takes her heels off, and then Chevy takes his heels off. But now, really, how good is Jane?
They did a great. Yes, she's fantastic, and they do a great job. When every time they come out from under the covers, they manage to flip flop sides. Jane and Chevy, I thought that was a pretty good move.
Yes.
But somehow through all this, Jane is still good. She has few lines in this, but when she does, they hit, and they're really good.
When she introduces herself to the judges. Yeah. And, thank God for Thurgood Marshall, because Garrett got they had to put Garrett in.
With lines and all. Go Garrett.
Yeah.
Well, we should go because I did my research, Garrett, and my research is that
go on.
Tom Schiller wore a mustache. So that's all I have. So please keep going.
Was this an O'Donoghue sketch?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
As far as I know.
Because that's what caught my attention was that O'Donoghue had more lines than Garrett, even though Garrett got a line. And that's when I was like, well, this is O'Donoghue.
I did like his gag when he pulls the covers up. Can I get another opinion here? And they all swarm over.
I just read the Dick Ebersol book, and apparently Michael O'Donoghue was supposed to be a cast member, and then they relented on Chevy, which is just amazing to think about the turn.
Oh, like going in, O'Donoghue was supposed to be?
Yeah, and he became the writer, and Chevy was supposed to be just a writer, and he became a cast member.
Yeah, I knew the Chevy part. I didn't know that O'Donoghue was supposed to be. That's interesting.
I didn't either. I mean, this is, Dick Ebersol's memory. I don't know.
How is that book?
It's good.
Yeah.
It's really good.
After the Supreme Court, we get our third press secretary through history, John Quincy Ross, who is the press secretary to Thomas Jefferson. This time, Ron Nessen comes out in a wig and full, 1700s, 1800s regalia, and talks about, Thomas Jefferson did not, in fact, have slaves. He had 6,000 relatives who really enjoyed picking cotton 20 hours a day.
Well, you see, Gary, the thing with a runner is you have to have three. So, they tried. Sometimes they're tough to pull off, but, they tried.
Yeah.
I don't want to spend time picking on Ron Nessen not being funny. Can we get into Billy Crystal not being funny?
Go on. Yeah. I believe he was billed as Bill Crystal this time.
Yeah, because he didn't deserve the Y. That's why.
So he comes on and performs part of his one-man show wherein he reenacts visiting an elderly jazz musician.
Yes.
Yeah, and he basically does what he basically does 5 minutes as an old blues musician talking to himself backstage, right? I mean, it's not stand up.
No,
it's more like Lily Tomlin-esque, right? Of like a one person.
Yeah, it's a one person show.
Yeah.
He did this character on the first Comic Relief.
Yeah, I mean the crowd wasn't into this from the start.
No, they were not.
He came out and had one joke in the beginning that fell flat right away. And so
I guess it's kind of hard to come because it's not like he's doing a routine where if a joke or two don't hit, you can pivot, make a turn, do something else. He was committed from the start. He's stuck doing this bit, and
yeah, it was bad. And I like Billy Crystal.
yeah,
I don't know. This made me think maybe I don't like Billy Crystal as a writer, but a performer.
His time on SNL, he wrote a lot. He wrote 2 or 3 pieces a week.
He wrote a lot of those.
Yeah, he wrote a lot of it. But I mean, he was only doing stand up for a year because he was in a 3-man group, and then he was only doing stand up by himself for a year when he almost got on the first SNL.
right.
So he's very young in his career.
And it's also weird because this was not the bit he was supposed to do on the first SNL. It was wasn't like a safari bit or something like that. It was a completely different bit. So he came back and put on a whole different routine. And granted, it's, what do you say, 7-8 months later. So of course he maybe has new material, but.
And they gave him more time, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, it did feel like they gave him a lot of time.
When the bit doesn't go anywhere, it does feel like it drags.
Well, the next bit was definitely not too long. It comes back to Nessen on stage in front of the curtain, introducing a show called Misconceptions, wherein they try to disprove different adages. And this one was that there are too many cooks spoil the broth. And so then we get essentially what was the entire Supreme Court.
Yes.
Just now wearing aprons, right?
They took their jackets off and their robes off.
Robes came off and aprons went on. And they're all standing around a pot. And John comes in and as the head chef and tastes it and says it's great. And therefore, there not too many cooks could spoil the broth.
Right. And this could be a sketch that anyone wrote. And I don't mean that in a bad way.
No. Or everyone wrote. Like they all were sitting around and threw lines together. I mean, right off the bat, I'm like, this is going to be funny. This could be really funny. And I went back and watched it a second time. You need to watch this and just watch Dan the entire time because he's so good. Well, from the beginning, he's the one who's the loudest with the accent. So he's got this obnoxious French accent. He's really funny. And then when John comes in and he's tasting it, he's got these facial expressions that are just so great. And it's like, again, this is another, it's like quietly Dan still stealing the show in a sketch. And I thought the outro was great when they talk about the next episode and how they would prove a cat does not have more than one life. Like, it's a total National Lampoon O'Donoghue line if I've ever heard one.
Yeah. I think it was funny too, Brad, you were talking about the suit that Nessen was wearing for much of this episode. He's now wearing the shirt and pants and vest with no tie, no jacket, but it's all the same that he's
late
been
night,
wearing
baby.
the entire
10 to
time.
1. 10 to 1. Kicking back.
Well, 10 to 1. And then we get Patti Smith Group again, introduced by Don Pardo, and they come out and sing My Generation from The Who. This was a B-side to their single of Gloria.
Mm-hmm. At first I was like, 2 covers. But then I realized, kind of par for the course of the season. I feel like a lot of our acts are playing, like I realized that a lot of these acts play covers, no?
Well, Neil Sedaka covered himself. So
That's true.
there are 3 covers on her first album, which of 10 songs.
Oh.
Yeah, they had a lot of covers in their repertoire. And they, made them harder, more punk, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I am not a big Patti Smith fan. I am a big Who fan. But even saying that, I enjoyed this performance. I didn't necessarily like, this is going to sound so weird. I didn't necessarily like the song that well, but I thought her performance was great. Like, this is the kind of act this show needs. This kind of rebellious punk rock and roll. For the first time in 17 episodes, we finally get, I think, the kind of musical act that this show really wants to have and I think will continue to have and really shine a spotlight on. And so for that, I enjoyed watching that. And then by the end, I thought it was awesome. The Keith Moon-esque, let's break the drum set and go, and they just walk off stage. I totally bought into it. I totally thought it was great. And as much as I may not care for the group, I thought their performance was fantastic. And I'm so glad they were on the show.
I just don't think those bands that, for SNL were around yet that you're talking about in 1975.
That's true. We brought this up the other week about, I think, and tell me, and you probably have talked to more people about this, Ian, that the music world might have been a little bit slower or hesitant to jump on board with a brand new late night variety show than, say, comedians or entertainers, because it felt like you were getting more higher level echelon performers as far as host, but for musical guests, you're getting your Esther Phillips, your Anne Murray's, your Neil Cicadas. I mean, the quote unquote bigger acts you're getting are what, ABBA? Billy Preston, and I love Billy. We love Billy Preston, but it just seemed like at 1975, the top acts on the charts, or even kind of hippest acts on the chart, weren't really on the show just yet. We commented, it was last week, right, where we had Betty Carter, whose prime was 20 years prior, as your musical guest. Like, they just jump leaps and bounds. I just don't think they're there at this point in the music world, but that was just my thought.
Yeah, and the money that they pay is still the same. I think it's $1,500. I know it's $3,000 for the host. It's just like an honor to be, to be invited. So
right, and at this point, the music acts just didn't care.
Some of those early acts might need the $1,500.
Oh,
Yeah, that's true.
And the exposure, yeah.
It's a total 180 from the host too, right? You have this really, like, you have the press secretary, and then this punk band from New York that is not known to anyone, and it's just like
which works.
Opposites. It totally works. Yeah,
we kind of commented, it was a Dick Cavett, Jimmy Cliff. For some reason, it just didn't work. They just didn't meld, or even them being so polar opposite felt weird. But to your point, yes, this totally makes sense.
Yeah, right. And sometimes you have to think that they're booking these guests together just to kind of like add a little bit. But this one, I thought even Ron Nessen's intro of them in the beginning was great, and just like, not like Dick Cavett, where he thought it was funny to poke fun at Jimmy Cliff for who knows what reason.
Yes. And I think it's also a good opportunity for the show to roll the dice. Like, we're going to now go on a young, like Ian just said, not well-known act and try to showcase somebody that we think you want to see. And it really works. And gets the ball rolling for this to happen more frequently as we move on with the show.
Yeah, totally.
I would have liked to have seen the Ramones.
Yeah.
Oh, that would have been good. Yeah.
In the first 5 years, but
this was our last bit of the night, was the musical act, which we've seen, before, but never in a great way, really. Like this, I thought this was a good way to close out the show. Yeah,
totally works.
We come back for good nights, and it's Ron Nessen on stage talking about how much fun he had, and saying that Tony Basil and the Muppets couldn't be here due to technical difficulties.
Well, the Muppets were originally on.
Right.
They had actually gone up through dress, I believe, and were supposed to be on the show that night. And the bees, another Muppets bees joke, but
right.
Yeah, there are pictures of that.
Yeah. I've seen those.
It might have been a technical strike.
Yeah, too much going on. They couldn't cover it well enough to actually pull it off. Yeah, I could see that.
And no Shapiro sisters either, so.
I thought he was good doing the Raquel Welch joke where she's next week's host. It was genuine. It felt pretty good. And I was really hoping, I wrote down, I really hope the cast come up and don't leave him stranded there by himself. And they did, and they came up, and it was really nice. It was fun.
It was. And they even said, like, we have time to fill, and Chevy sincerely thanks him for coming on the show, and they fill that time. It was it. That was the end. I thought it was good. It was nice, to your point, to see the cast come up and interact with him on a personal level.
I like this one. I like this a lot more than I thought. It was a lot of fun. Taking aside the historical ramifications and how important this show is, just as a show itself, entertainment value, very fun, especially for a host who's not an entertainer, not even a comedian, let alone an entertainer. I thought it was really great. Came in with low expectations and totally exceeded them.
I mean, I think the stakes were high for this show going into it, probably because of all of the getting him on the show and the historical ramifications. But I think they nailed it and kind of proved themselves of like, yep, we're a legit comedy show.
I totally agree. I think it was one of the best shows from the first season. That's why it was one of the ones I sent you as something I would like to come on and talk about.
Oh, not only is it one of the best shows of the season, I mean, it's a landmark episode. I mean, this is a huge episode for the history of the show moving forward. I mean, bringing in not only non-entertainers, but, politicians, and then the role the show is going to play in politics and that whole discourse for the next 40, 50 years. I mean, it takes some time till you start getting actual candidates, on the show, but you get your Jesse Jacksons, your George McGoverns, your Ralph Naders, you get all these people throughout the years, and it really shows the kind of impact this show can and will eventually have. It shows how important they set on this one. And to Gary's point, they knew, I think they had this wider spotlight on them on this episode with this particular host. And yeah, they came out and proved we're legit. We got the goods.
And after the show, they had their after party on the rink at Rockefeller Plaza, and he got hammered. This press secretary got hammered. and basically said, "I love this. This was great." And it was real. He was like, "I loved this week. This week was so much fun. The cast loved him. They got along. They got along great." And then he went back to Washington and got hammered by the press.
Yeah, the administration got beat up on this, right?
Yeah. His kids, Ford's kids, were like, "You're supposed to protect my father, not make him look like an idiot," was one of the quotes.
Huh.
Well, and the media just thought it backfired on them. Like their goals of showing they were in on the joke to help his ratings and approval and whatnot raise just didn't really happen, right?
Right. But I think the official thing that they sent out was the political stuff was funny, but the rest of it was in bad taste, was what Betty Ford had to say. And then Chevy ran into Gerald Ford 15 years later and apologized to him.
Really?
For all the jokes. It was after, he had the drug troubles and he was being made fun of a lot. And he's like, now I could see how this could hurt somebody's family and hurt stuff like that. But, that was 1991.
Right.
In a charity golf tournament.
So, Ian, every week we talk about our best bits from the episode. So what are your best bits?
I mean, I got to go with the tried and true, the Super Bassamatic 76 and Smuckers.
That's good. Brad, how about you? What is your best bit?
I had Bassamatic on my list, and that's probably all I'm going to do. I feel like I love the Dan Aykroyd Tom Snyder impression, but I feel like we'll get it later on when there's a better one. So I would add nothing to Ian's list.
I'm going to add the Tom Snyder bit just because it's the first time we saw him and just like the way the crowd reacted.
Yeah.
It's not like, right. I enjoyed that they reacted genuinely. It's not a running bit that they've seen like the Francisco Franco bit where they applaud.
That's
right?
the big thing.
It was like, yeah.
Like we've seen this, maybe 2 other times, John's Joe Cocker.
Yep.
And John's Brando, where they've seen it for the first time and gone nuts.
Yes.
So yeah. I mean, I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it shouldn't be on there.
Ian, thank you so much for coming on with us and doing this. This is great.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So folks can find your podcast, Ian Talks Comedy, anywhere they download podcasts?
Anywhere they download podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere that you download podcasts.
It's great. It's a great podcast. Ian interviews, like he said earlier, different writers, comedians, and everyone throughout the last 50 years, I guess, in comedy, right? So it's a great show. Check it out.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I love that show. It's great. And thank you so much for reaching out to us.
Next week, we're going to be talking about Season 1, Episode 18 with host Raquel Welch and musical guests Phoebe Snow and John Sebastian. Until then, good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.